Thank you so much for joining me. This is my first question, really. When do you know you've got a story? When do you take the thing that's in your mind, in your head, and you start to develop it in a serious way? What's that process like?
Sometimes it's different for every book. So I can only really give you concrete examples. That with the Blackwater Lightship, say the novel, I had something. And then on a Friday, just something, an image of something. And then on a Friday evening, and I remember it, I went to a movie and had an espresso before the movie, which I wouldn't normally do in the evening. So when I came home, I was slightly wired. It was a Friday evening and I was alone. And I just simply, the first sentence of the novel came. And I started to work. And I didn't expect it. And that's how that happened. Sometimes with a short story, again, you just get an opening sentence and then you just work. You see, you can't force it. But once you have a beginning, you must then force it. You must work. There's no point in saying, I must wait for inspiration to come for each sentence or each section. Once you get the opening, you have, as it were, a key. As though you're writing in a certain key, and you simply work within the tones that the opening sentence has offered you. Sometimes this looks very simple. I mean, the opening sentence of the Blackwater Lightship is as follows. Helen woke in the night to the sound of Manus whimpering. Well, that's not much, but actually it gives you a way in. It's a suggestion that this is a chamber piece, that it's probably for two instruments or for solo piano. It's not a big orchestral opening. I've got a novel coming out next year about Thomas Mann, and I had all the work done and I sort of knew what I wanted to do, but I just didn't have the key. I didn't know how I was going to start. And I was in Brazil where Thomas Mann's mother was born. And his mother was Brazilian, and which gave him a sort of an exotic thing, which is terribly important in his makeup. And so there was a mixture of this Lubeck merchant, his father, with this woman who was born in Brazil, his mother. And so I'm standing at the house, which is on the coast, and it's in an inlet. And I'm with the Australian novelist Richard Flanagan. And the house is right on the water. And Richard points out to me, and I have no idea whether this is true or not, it doesn't bother me, that in the southern hemisphere, the stars are lower. The sky is lower at night, and the stars are much more visible. And that you can, in a house like that with water, so much water, you can actually read by the light of the stars at night, that stars hitting against the water and the water being all brightness. Of course, I thought this was the most marvelous image. I didn't stop to say, Richard, are you sure this is true? It's just something that Thomas Mann's mother tells. But once he said it to me, I was away. I had the thing I would start with.
Are there periods of sort of idler times where you're waiting necessarily for the inspiration to land?
Unfortunately, I'm never idle. Your job is to finish the book. And that's the aim. So you think, well, if I work today, it will be another step towards finishing the book. And so it becomes work. You do it every day. You find sometimes that you get better at it, that the sentences become more fluent or more sort of rhythmically confident. And but in between that, what I do is I teach one semester every year. So I read a lot. If I'm teaching a book, I will always read the book the days before the class because I only work with detail. I don't have a theory. And I find that very enriching, and I'm not complaining about it. And I also write big, long book reviews. Big, long book reviews. And sometimes the big, long book reviews really are work, and you get buried in the business of whatever is your subject, and so I would have books piled up to read or to consult, and I would be structuring the piece, and I would be quite involved. It'd be quite like writing a novel. And the only difference is that the editor becomes the person, almost like the entire reading public, where you only reaction you're ever going to get is from the editor. They have no interest in whether you think the book is good or bad. So it's not like saying, this is a good review of this book. It's an essay around the issues which the book raises. And so it's, I've become really involved with it and engaged by it, and it keeps me out of harm's way.
How do you find the balance between teaching and then writing fiction, the other 2 terms of the year when you're not teaching?
I think this semester, this year at Columbia, I taught a course on Ulysses for undergraduates. I was totally engaged with this. I did a lot of work every week before the class, and the classes were busy. I hope by the end of the semester, the students knew something they didn't know before they were coming in. I have a feeling that some of them won't forget it, just because the book itself is so engaging that if you could just put the energy in, you get a great deal back from it. And that's how I work.
You're a details man, and I've read in preparing for this that you don't necessarily see the importance of theory. I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about that.
Well, I think because I'm a novelist, when I go into the classroom, I go in with the idea that the book was at one point unwritten and was written slowly and tentatively by an individual, and that it comes from a very enclosed and precise imagination. Now, once you accept this, and not everybody does, the autonomy, the willfulness of the named author, then I can start getting under that author's intentions and look at the systems that author worked with. I think somebody else might be able to come in and look at the book in an entirely different way, arising from a set of theories about literary value and the imagination itself. It would simply be different. I too have a theory, and my theory is that the imagination is autonomous.
What was that process like with teaching Ulysses over the course of a term? What were you looking for? What caught your eye?
Oh, I think what you were looking for was, with each episode, to make sure that it was understood how autonomous, again, using the word autonomous, how autonomous each episode was, and how he wanted to set up a style and then exhaust the style so that he would replace it with something else, as though he was breathlessly going through whatever tones were available to him, breaking each one as he went. In other words, as he left each house, he burned the house down and moved on to another one, so that in something like Cyclops, you're looking at an entirely different system of narrative than you are, say, in something like Wandering Rocks. And so therefore the point was, as you came to each episode, to actually look, what is this episode doing? What stylistic things should we be looking for? What continuities from the previous chapter? So you would just go like that. And also, sometimes you really need to gloss quite a lot, because there are things that are fascinating. For example, in Cyclops, the whole account of the execution of Robert Emmet. You need to know who Robert Emmet was, but you need to know also what was the emotion surrounding Robert Emmet in Dublin in 1904. I think Ulysses, at the moment, certain episodes really do hit spots that are in dispute at the moment. For example, there's an episode in the book where Leopold Bloom masturbates on Sandyman Strand. He's looking under a woman's dress, and she seems to be engaged with this, but not wholly. In other words, his gaze is this thing we know so well. It's the male gaze, and that's something certainly the students, all of them, are concerned about this and wonder about creating images, further images of this, and reading about it. And the other one is where Leopold Bloom, in the Circe episode, in the brothel, he cross-dresses and he actually becomes a woman. Now, again, this is something that is a burning issue at the moment, that in the classroom we have to look at the text as both a living text, meaning we are reading it now, and as an historical text, meaning it was published, it's set in 1904 and was published in 1922, so we have to look at it from the gaze or the eyes of someone in 1922, as well as looking at it through our own particular perspectives. So, it isn't as though this is a sort of a modernist masterpiece that we have to sort of wade our way through, utterly bored by the images and the episodes. That it is something that actually really begins to matter. And also because Stephen Dedalus is a young student in the book, or he has been. He's a very young man. That idea of somebody young wandering in a city. But there are many other things in the book that I think interest a contemporary audience. And it's very, very exciting from my side, presenting this to these very enthusiastic students for the first time in their lives, knowing that this is something that they will remember, as long as they live. And it's an exciting idea.
What stands out for you in what you've read as being particularly influential for you as a writer?
I'm interested in a tradition that would go, say, from Jane Austen through to Henry James, with perhaps continuities in the 20th century. I'm interested in the idea of how consciousness is rendered, how an individual is placed at the heart of a book, and that often young woman, but it could be a young man, that the mind and the fate and the idea of choice and chance are all dealt with, first of all, as unique experiences for a single consciousness. And secondly, someone living in a small society, such as a family or a small community. And thirdly, whatever larger issues are affecting the day. But the main thing is the single face, the single consciousness, the single soul, as it were. And you find this also in Balzac, and you find it in Stendhal, and you find it obviously in Flaubert. This whole idea of as though you're taking your bearings from Rembrandt, or indeed from Vermeer, where you're getting a single face, a single soul, a single consciousness, a single set of feelings, and you're working with them. So the person, Jane Austen is often at her very best when the person is alone. Similarly, in something like Middlemarch, it's a fascinating panorama of a society, but what really matters is when Dorothea is alone, what she does when she's alone, how she thinks, and how the novel renders this. This is obviously the big moment in something like Portrait of a Lady, where Henry James finds that he writes about the book years later, saying that the chapter where most happens is the chapter where Isabella is entirely alone, sitting by a dying fire through the night, thinking about things. And I think as a novelist, I find that those scenes are the hardest to write and the most necessary, and the ones you have to put the most sort of rhythmic energy into without putting too much in, to keep the reader's mind or to hit the reader's nervous system, so that when the character is alone, that solitude has to become energetic, dynamic, and dramatic. In the 19th century, novelists began to contemplate the inner life. Now, it doesn't mean we don't have it before. We have it obviously in painting. We have it in Shakespeare. But I'm talking about the inner life in a novel where the reader is reading in silence. The reader is alone. And this idea then of looking at an individual's spirit, not in relation to politics or to history, but in relation to actually their own feelings being enough for someone's destiny, or someone's relationship to choice or chance being enough for a novel, without having to go into the whole business of, say, the importance of a Napoleonic War on the novel, or the importance of Corn Laws, or the importance of the Great Reform Act. These in George Eliot are sort of minor matters compared to the larger question, which is that Dorothea is facing her destiny, and it's her life within that becomes dramatic. Now, I think this probably has enormous political repercussions in some way, but I'm not interested in that as much as I am in the idea of becoming involved in another sensibility. And the richer that sensibility is, the better, as a reader, and finding that sensibility yields a great deal. What I mean is that I'm not just reading the novel for entertainment, but I'm not reading it for instruction either. I'm reading it for an emotional engagement at the level of nervous system, where I'm actually feeling the thing very deeply. The thing being, what is happening to this glittering, flickering consciousness within the pages of this book. And the richer this consciousness is, the more dynamic and the more contradictions within the consciousness, particularly with someone like Madame Bovary, say, or indeed with something like Dorothea or Isabel Archer, or any of the women figures in Jane Austen.
What's going through your head when you're trying to convince the reader that this is what matters?
I think sometimes that the next sentence is a response to the previous sentence, and it may need to be different in tone, to have a different shape to it, and it may need to bring things further. But the most important thing, it needs to be true. This means it needs to be true to a certain truth that you have set up, so that if someone is coming into a room, what they see, the first thing they see, the first thing they notice, how they feel then. So you do see, notice something else, and make a decision over where to move in the room, and then realize that might not have been the right decision, and then try and move maybe further into the shadows, thus to see further what was noticed earlier on. So that what you've built up by the end is a picture of someone coming into a room that the reader will know this person, will want then, will I think if you call it third person intimate, and if you say that the aim of it is that very soon into a book, maybe 30 pages in, using third person singular, he, she, the reader starts to see the world through that character's eyes, feel things through that character's feelings, notice the world through that character's ability to notice. And therefore, the richer you have the character's noticing skills, the more developed, and the more detail you put in, the more you bring the reader in. So the reader in third person intimate sees the world through that, through the character's eyes, and therefore, of course, becomes completely engaged with the character's fate and worries about it. And also, you can obviously do first person singular, and some writers do. In some books, some writers do. And that means you're hearing a voice. It is as though someone is whispering to you or speaking to you or telling you something, but you're utterly alert to their otherness, to the fact that they're another person. With third person intimate, even though it should be more remote, it oddly enough isn't, that you become engaged with the fate of the character by courtesy of seeing the world slowly. And I think it's a question of accretion, that you build a detail and you build a detail and you make them true, or you make them seem true. So the reader doesn't stop for a second and say, I don't think she would feel that then. You don't want that. You want a sort of seamlessness. It doesn't mean the characters cannot behave out of character, because it's quite important that the characters are not just bland and easy to read. They can be as complex as you please, but all the time, your effort is to make what they're saying and feeling and noticing in some way or other true, or at least possible, or at least not irritating for the reader to say, this is an author. Now, the issue of the author here is important. The author has to become invisible. The self-suppression is supreme. The first thing you do is you say, the page is blank. It is not a mirror. I am not looking at myself as I write. I'm looking at something blank. I'm filling the page. It is not me. It is the character. And therefore, interjecting or seeming to be present is a very dangerous. It can be done, but it's dangerous. And I wouldn't try it. There are other people who are very skilled at it. But all the time you're concentrating on the person, on the character you have made, and how that character responds to sensations or to experience.
What are you looking to do with your first edit?
I think you become your own reader. And the more you read, the more books you normally just read, the more skilled you become at detecting bullshit, at detecting a sentence that doesn't work, at detecting something that doesn't ring true, or often with me, it's detecting when something is just too long. And as each read, at the moment that I give something, each read, I can take out more. I work closely with editors, and I actually like editors, and I listen to editors. But mainly at the moment for me, it's a question of cutting, that you just don't need that paragraph. And it takes you a while to realize, I just don't need a paragraph. And it's a huge liberation just getting rid of it and realize, oh my God, I've just freed the book from that boring paragraph. And I released it into the upper air. And so, yeah, that's what I'm doing really once the first draft is there. If a sentence stands out, I mean, you're always using repetitions. There's always a word you use far too much. I mean, I just try to wean myself off as though or as if, which is, you find it's really useful, but you've got to use it sparingly. And there are always, so someone else can often point this out to you. Do you realize how many times? And often the last sentence of a paragraph isn't needed, that you should let the paragraph just dangle rather than try and do a clanging end to a paragraph. There's a lot of stuff like that. It's quite enjoyable, by the way, compared to the initial business of getting the thing down. The editing is sort of sweet work.
What's the quickest you've ever written a book?
I wrote Brooklyn very quickly. I probably had it done in, I would say, 15 months, maybe, from its original, from starting it. Yeah, probably had it done by then. And maybe with the Blackwater Lightship, with both of those books. Others have just been, I mean, forever, really, and something like the Henry James novel, The Master, it was years, yeah. It's lovely work, and you hope it's never going to end.
Where do you think your desire to write comes from?
I remember meeting Sue Townsend at a literary conference in Portugal, and she just said to me, without any other introduction, "So what happened to you?" And what she meant was, what in childhood or early adolescence, what trauma or what difficulty occurred in your life that caused you to move into this sort of strange circle of wishing to create images that disguised or concealed images of yourself that managed actually to release quite a lot of personal energy into the world, as though the world needed to hear your story over and over and over as metaphor, as transfigured notions of the self, and that your voice somehow or other needed to speak up above the general babble. And I, of course, said, well, we had difficulties at home, that my father was sick when I was a kid and he died when I was 12. And she said, oh, yes, well, that would be, And W.H. Auden said it very beautifully. He said, as much neurosis as the child can take. If you want to make a writer in a family, you give the child a vast amount of neurosis. And I think writers make too much of this. I think it's something that writers love, the idea. So we're special because we were all badly damaged, and somehow our damage, we're taking it out, or we're trying to heal ourselves using fiction. I don't know. I mean, it might be much simpler to say that you suddenly realized, aged about 12 or 13, there was something you could do that other people couldn't do, which is write down things and make people believe they were true. And that is remarkable, because it's the thing that children really love, hearing a story. So it's not as though stories are rarefied or strange or belong to some literary community. But that whole idea of what happened next, who went where, he went where, why did he go there? That all of that is so basic to our nature. And if you find that, in medieval Europe or in pagan Ireland, that, around the campfire at night, people would listen to you and want you to appear so you could tell a story. That's pretty important. And so maybe it comes from some sort of mixture of inadequacy on one side of wanting to be noticed, and on the other side, an ability to do it. And therefore, it actually makes up for a lot of things that are probably missing in you. But it is back with the business of that the people are at night, have nothing to do, they're sitting around, and you start and you tell the story. And by the time the story's ended, it's dawn, and they're not frightened anymore.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
For more debates, talks, and interviews, subscribe today to the Institute of Art and Ideas at IAI TV.